Okay, Les, go ahead.
We're all set. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the closing program of day one of Eckerd College Writers Conference, Writers in Paradise 2021. We wish we could be with you in person, of course, but this is the next best thing, and it ain't half bad, if I don't say so myself. I want to thank our participating writers tonight. We're going to close as well tomorrow night with readings, short readings by each of the participants in today's program of craft talks and conversation. We will read in the order that I'm going to announce in just 1 second. There is no question and answer period for the readings. We just invite you to enjoy this evening and come back and be with us tomorrow beginning at noon for another program, another wonderful program. Kicking it off tonight will be Ana Menendez, who would have been leading the workshop in short fiction had we been able to meet face to face. Ana is the author of 4 collections, including the one with my favorite title, In Cuba, I Was a German Shepherd. She will be followed by suspense and crime writer and the writer of the Supernatural, Michael Corita, whose most recent novel is If She Wakes, which kept me awake first to last, could not put it down. Third in the batting order will be Major Jackson, who would have been teaching the poetry seminar for us this week, and he's done it a couple of times before. We're glad to have him back. Everybody whom you see tonight and tomorrow will be with us in 2022, so make sure to keep your eyes peeled for registration for that. And batting cleanup in his normal position in high school and college will be Sterling Watson, the co-founder and for many years co-director of this conference. His current book, thriller, following the exploits of the Johns Committee and during the McCarthy era in Florida, is called The Committee. I presume you're going to read us a little snippet of that, Sterling. I hope so. In any case, that's who you're going to hear from in that order. I know you're going to enjoy it, and we're going to be out of here in time for Sterling to watch the Bucks trample all over the Saints. All right, Sterling? With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ana, who will kick things off. It's been a great day. I've enjoyed myself. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Les, and thank you, Marina, for the wonderful organization in the conference. Thank you, Sterling and Dennis and Cole, working there behind the scenes. It's a real pleasure to read with Michael and Major and Sterling. So thank you for letting me go first and not have to follow any of these great writers. So I'm going to be reading from The Shunting Trains Trace Iron Labyrinths, which is the last story in my collection, Adios Happy Homeland. And I picked it because it is an ending story, and that's what my craft talk was about. And it wraps up the collection, and it includes images and lines from each of the stories that come before it, although that's neither here nor there to you. The title comes from a wonderful poem of Jorge Luis Borges. I boarded the train and took the last empty seat by a stranger. Outside, it was snowing. There was an announcement in 3 languages, none of which I understood. Seeing my confusion, the stranger turned to me and said, "This train goes to the coast." I thanked her. More people came on board. Men were forced to stand in the aisles. After a while, the car began to move. On the platform, those left behind shook their fists. Two men in long coats ran along the edge, waving at the conductor and pointing to the car where I sat. They wore identical black hats and looked like brothers. I understood then that they would follow me wherever I went, would follow me until death. Outside, dawn had returned, but brought with it little light. The sky was low and gray, though still studded with faint candlelight. The train picked up speed. Dirty snow piled along both sides of the tracks. We were moving through a bare landscape empty of trees or homes. The only structures were enormous steel pylons arranged in rows into the smoky distance. The woman pointed to the place where the parallel rows met and said, "That's where we're going." She said her name was Gertrude. "I know you," I said. But she said she had never seen me before, that I must have her confused with someone else. She had come from a city farther north and had been traveling for several days, trying to reach the coast like the others. "Everyone here is an emigrant," she explained. "We're all going to the same place." The train rocked and I slept. After a time, I was woken by another announcement, repeated in 3 strange languages. I waited for Gertrude to translate it, but she didn't. I asked her how they passed the time on the train. "Only waiting," she said. "And sometimes they play a movie." She pointed to the tattered screens hanging at the front of the car, but it's always the same one. 3 times a day, by however a day was measured, the dining car opened, Gertrude told me. They always served the same thing. After a while, I asked Gertrude the question I feared most. When will we arrive? Gertrude shrugged. "It's up to the conductor." "Who is the conductor?" "No one knows," she replied. Before she fell asleep, she said, "Some of us have been traveling for years and we still don't know." I too had been traveling for years. In the summer of my 37th year, I set out from home without destination or goal. I was weary of inventions and the lies needed to sustain them. The things that passed for reality no longer animated me. Simulated conversations, the blue light at twilight, landscapes brushed with premonition, these all stopped meaning anything, and the world that I had made for myself, that had once, at its creation, filled me with hope, now collapsed into hollow space. I woke one morning to realize that all about me was void, that it was I who had invented sound, light, color, love, shame. I had made the red and the black, the good and bad, the telling abstraction, as well as the showing detail, which was really, I now saw, the cleverest and most insidious lie ever told. Worse than this, I understood now with perfect horror that I had also invented other people. Everyone I loved and hated, every pompous rich man I ever knew, every poor laborer was mine and was me. The leper for whom I refused to lower the window, the boy who dreamt of flight, the glamorous stranger I met in Istanbul, the cook with a failed dream, was really me on the cusp of adulthood, full of fire and feeling, so as not to know that I was unloved and alone. The world was an illusion, sustained by my need to make it whole. This knowledge came upon me slowly over many weeks, even years. The train pulled us along, tireless. We crossed one sea and then another. The landscape changed from jungle to desert and back again. Details are stupid and unreal. Don't get sucked in by my lies. There was only sand and sand and sand. It blew in the afternoons, toward evening, with the most mournful howling you'll ever hear. It shook the cars of the train, a wind strong enough to unhorn goats. On the 3rd day, Gertrude told me that she had once lived by the sea. As a young woman, she had taken many lovers, and they all died. She had a child with a poet who left her before the child was born. The child also died. She married another poet, and he died. She married again and divorced for no reason. "Look," she said, "the movie's begun." On the tattered screen appeared the familiar scene, a border zone, a man jumping over barbed wire, a family on a picnic learns of a teenager shot while trying to escape. A balloon will be built. The images had worn holes in the canvas. "I've seen this," I said. "Of course," said Gertrude. "All the stories are the same. We're always leaving." We watched the movie until the last credits because there was nothing else to do. I slept. After a time, the weather grew warm. I opened the window. We had left the desert and entered a new land. I told Gertrude that I could smell the sea, and she laughed. How long have we been traveling? I asked Gertrude. Impossible to say, she replied. I stood and told her I was going to speak to the conductor. She laughed, but didn't stop me. I had to push my way through the front of the car. I passed into another car identical to mine. Again, I pushed my way up the aisle. Men and women filled every seat. Near the front, a little boy sat crying next to his mother, who slept beside him, unmoved. I passed into the next car, this one identical to the one before. Again, I had to push my way through the people in the aisles. Where is the conductor? I asked, but no one understood my language. The next car was full of young men, each sitting by himself, staring ahead or out the window, not a word among them, each having cast his lot with this world's most solitary spirits. I left the car and passed into another car, again identical to the ones I had left behind. How many cars are in this train? I asked, but no one replied. In the next car, 4 women sat close together, talking quietly. The oldest among them lifted her head and saw me. Suddenly she stood and began to shout at me, pointing with a book she held in her hand. The others stood as well. It's not me, I said. I'm not the conductor. Some of the men in the car stood and began to walk toward me. The women continued to shout, pointing fingers and appealing to the others for justice. I pushed through the aisles, leaving the crowd behind, and came to another car. This one was full of white horses. They stood alone, calmly. As I passed, they stepped aside to give me room. I had grown tired and wanted to sleep there among those gentle horses, but I knew I must push on to the front, where the conductor waited with the secret of our destination. At last I reached the last car, but it was one just like the others, the same people in the seats, the same men crowding the aisles, in the 4th row from the front, Gertrude sitting next to an empty space, my own. Did you find the conductor? She asked me. I sat exhausted. Later that evening, there was another announcement in 3 languages. Gertrude said simply, "We are headed for the coast." Through days and nights we moved, not stopping for snow or heat. Our route seemed to cut through the center of this country, crisscrossing abandoned cities, ancient forests, jungles of ferns. Mine seems to have been the last station. One morning we passed an army truck full of sleeping soldiers, but otherwise the landscape was empty of the living, just miles and miles of land and sky. Along the side of the track grew brown bushes studded with colored bits of paper and plastic. The train rocked from side to side like a fugitive raft on the sea. When it was hot, the people slept. In the cold, they moved close to one another. Now and then, a distant whistle blew. Sometimes smoke from the engine sucked back in through the windows, unraveling the 1,001 stories on that train. All who create will find one day the need to destroy. See the shining husband with the beautiful wife. Like all of us, he began his life with hope. And then in the middle of it, he begins to take it all down piece by piece. The flawless beauty of it is too much to bear. We abandon our cities and our ambitions. At the first sign of boredom, we take to the air. Better to pass through this life in the night, leaving no fingerprints, like a thief who does it for joy. One day toward evening, I woke to the sound of tinkling bells. Shards of light cut through the dusty air of our car. We had entered an endless rail yard. 20 yards from our train, a parallel train raced, bound for the same destination. And behind that, another train farther in the distance. And behind that one, we stood and opened the windows, and the passengers in the other trains did the same. We waved, and they returned our wave. We shouted into the absolute silence of that watery landscape and heard only our own voices repeated. We were still miles from the coast and alone. The others were an illusion. We were only passing through a wilderness of mirrors, startling ourselves, on the way back to the beginning. Thank you.
All right, that was wonderful. It's my pleasure to go next. It's not my pleasure to follow that. I miss everyone at Writers in Paradise, and particularly my workshop from last year. So I was thinking a lot about you guys and how we talked about different ways to create suspense. And hopefully I create some in this segment. And thank you to Marina and Les for putting this together. All right. The wasp flew into the back seat of the truck at night, unnoticed. Doug Chatfield had lowered the window earlier when he was driving home with his 13-year-old daughter, Haley, in the passenger seat, and his 11-year-old son, Nick, sprawled in the back amid a tangle of baseball gloves, cleats, and stink. The kids were arguing when Doug pulled into the winding entrance road of the subdivision. Haley took issue with what she termed Nick's totally rank BO. Nick responded by peeling off one sweaty sock, lunging forward, and dangling it under his sister's nose. That led to Haley grabbing her brother's hand and bending it backward, Mercy style. That led to a shriek of pain. At this point, Doug Chatfield said, "Come on, gang," and cracked the back window even though it was just beginning to rain, fat drops sprinkling out of a nickel-colored sky. "Release your brother and let his stink blow south," Doug said in the formal tone of a royal proclamation. The voice amused Haley. Nick's hand was freed, and the sock fell onto the console. Haley swept it away with disgust, and the cracked rear window let the humid summer air pass over the cargo in the back seat. Not much air, though. Doug had cracked the window only about an inch due to the rain. Cracked so little, in fact, that he didn't remember it was open at all by the time he pulled into the garage. The wasp was already in the garage. It had flown in when Doug exited the house that morning, and it was sealed off from its nest under the eaves when he put the door back down. When the Chatfield trio climbed out of the truck, the wasp crawled onto a dusty blue plastic tub that held Christmas lights. By the time it finally took flight, the garage door was down once more, and escape wasn't an option. Sometime around midnight, it found the cracked window. On Saturday mornings, there was neither work nor practice nor alarms in the Chatfield house. No demands on the family until 2 p.m. when Haley had tennis and 4 when Nick had another baseball game. Both activities weather dependent. The storms that had rocked the area overnight had saturated the ground but hadn't broken the humidity, and there was a good chance of more rain that afternoon. When Doug woke, the sky was dark, and on the back porch, where he stood with coffee in hand, the air was so thick it seemed to have texture, like passing through a curtain. "They'll be inside all day," he thought with confidence. A balanced breakfast was mandatory on most days, but this was summer vacation, it was Saturday, and his kids had a rainout. There was a Dunkin' Donuts 3 minutes up the road. Haley was a jelly fan and Nick a chocolate anything guy. Doug could get to the Dunkin' and back in 10 minutes, have the box waiting on the island whenever they woke and wandered downstairs. What the hell, he thought. They call it vacation for a reason. He left a note on the island just in case one of them woke, as unlikely as that was. One word with an exclamation mark. Donuts. He rarely left them alone, but they'd be fine, and it was good practice. This was, as he discussed with Haley repeatedly in recent weeks, the summer he wanted her to take more responsibility, as she was constantly demanding. She was convinced she was already an adult. 13 going on 30 was the tired joke in the bleachers at tennis matches, and that Doug smothered her was an overprotective, clueless dad. Maybe not entirely wrong. You couldn't bubble wrap your kids against the world, but you could give them treats. Let it rain, let them sleep late, and let them eat donuts. He grabbed his keys and went into the garage, started the truck and put up the door. Backed out, put the door back down, and pulled away. Only then did he hear the high whistle of air through a cracked window behind him and remember the body odor battle of the previous day. He shut the window without a glance in the back seat. He was at a stop sign near the low stone fence bearing the neighborhood's name when the wasp crawled from the door panel of the back seat to the driver's door panel in the front. Doug didn't see it. His eyes were ahead, on the road. There was no stop sign for cross traffic, and people drove too damn fast on the stretch. He paused for several seconds, making sure he was clear, and then turned left. Now he was on Oak Ridge Road, where the speed limit rose to 45 except on the S-curves when it dropped to 30. 1 mile down this road, one more stop sign, and then he'd be on 4th Street and the Dunkin' Donuts would be visible. He pressed down on the gas. An American Wasp is adorned with bright yellow and black bands. The colors are frequently adopted by sports teams and even warships for a reason. It's an aggressive visual pairing. It's supposed to be. The colors are intended to sound an alarm and provoke a primal response. Don't touch me, don't even come near me. For those who can't see the warning though, or those who can see it and choose not to take it seriously, the female wasp is equipped with a second protective measure, a stinger. Unlike a bee's barbed stinger, the wasp is smooth, capable of multiple stings. Only the female has a stinger because only she has the burden of protecting the nest. She remains close to it, unless the world intervenes. The wasp crawling along the armrest of Doug's Dodge Ram was a female, no longer near her nest. She was trapped and her threatening colors had been overlooked, ignored. When Doug shifted his left arm, the sleeve on his polo shirt rode up and he brushed against her. She stung him once in the meat of his left triceps. Doug shouted. The pain that rocketed through his muscular, nearly 200-pound frame in response to a quarter-inch long stinger was a blistering shock. He looked to his left, hurt and scared, exactly what the sting was meant to accomplish, and finally saw the wasp. She was still crawling along the door panel, still not taking to air. He shifted his left hand away from the steering wheel and swatted at her, missed. The wasp flew between his fingers, stung him once more, piercing the webbing just below his ring finger, and then clung to his hand. He made a high sound of surprise and tried to do two things at once: lower the driver's window and shake the wasp off before she could sting yet again. She was capable of hurting him, yet still just a trivial threat. Things would be fine if he could just fling her out of his world and into another. He had both hands off the steering wheel when the horn from the oncoming Chevy Tahoe blared. He looked up and grabbed the wheel, seeing, as the wasp stung him yet again, that he was well across the center line. He had time to jerk the wheel to the right as the Tahoe swerved away, and for a half second, everything was back in his control. The wasp was gone from his hand, and the collision had been avoided. Then the truck flipped. It rolled twice across the pavement before colliding with a 100-year-old oak tree that offered enough resistance to pin the wreck above the steep grade below. The airbags deployed, dust hung in the air with the smell of cordite, and bits of broken glass and plastic tinkled down into Doug's hair and rode rivulets of blood along his neck. Before the screaming started up on the road, and long before the sirens, the wasp found the shattered window and flew free. She buzzed there, alone above the carnage, and searched for a nest she could no longer find. All right. Thank you very much. Everyone be well, be safe.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Anna. Such a pleasure to read with you. Sterling, happy to be here with everyone. I'm going to read a poem from an anthology. I'm going to read 4 poems called Together in the Sudden Strangeness. American Poets Respond to the Pandemic. I also want to send some shout outs. Happy Rose is here, Olivia, other faculty this week, or for this abbreviated version of Writers in Paradise, and Emily is so good, Andre, Laura. I wish we were all together. Invocation. Down here, we've inherited an arcade of stars and want kindness that can stop a bomb. We want intelligence that survives mutations. No more rallies of hate. No more stone mountains. Just proliferating peaks in the presence of friends like magical wands. We want the father in the park running behind a child pedaling into her future. We want to turn a corner and stumble upon the muted concert of two in an embrace with entangled eyes. We want to hear a distant train whistle cast a spell on the coming night. Back in that faraway land, we were nurtured on a dance floor, blazing in some tribal purity, probably near some bride, probably swirling in sweaty laughter. As we reach for the tips of each other's fingers, streaming their ambient light. Such were the new births of ourselves, breaching horizons like a sting. This is not the ending we imagined. We want to see each other again, strangers walking through curtains of rain, storms, lighting up pastures laden with blossoms. I'm gonna try a new poem here, several new poems. This is Addiction. And addiction, I'm going through previous books, I'm realizing that it's been one of the themes that I've addressed and not consciously. It's just, I guess it's been such a part of my world and well, addiction. I knew a guy who went around punching his arm, creating conflicts with himself everywhere he went, at weddings, during communion, his niece's graduation. Simultaneously powerful and defenseless, he couldn't stop pummeling his body, his own worst enemy. He both despised and loved himself, knocking his head as though he were stuck thinking and attempted to release his copious thoughts or simply aimed to convince himself he had so much to live for. His bruises were like street scars from tire marks. A woman who fell in love with him started beating herself. One could see them in subway cars or fast food drive-thrus punching the daylight out of themselves until they slumped like sacks of potatoes in corners, their arms exposed like police reports. When introduced, no one had to say, "This is the guy who beats himself." It was evident in the disconsolate meadow he wore on his face and his swollen cheeks, which took the brunt of his blows. "I am learning to love myself best," he said. "I who am so famously dependent and cloudless." This is called Double Major and it's from The Absurd Man. "I emerge whenever he confuses the lamp for a moon. It is then he thinks of fine bindings and ordered athenaeums. I own his face, but he washes and spends too little time behind his ears. He sees me in the mirror behind thick clouds of shaving cream, then suddenly believes in ghosts. His other selves are murals in the cave of his mind. They are speechless, yet large. They stare his wishes like summer rain and amplify his terrors like newscasters. What he doesn't know, his dreams are his father's dreams, which are his grandfather's dreams, and so on. They possessed a single wish. He knocks repeatedly on the bolted door to his imagination. Tragically, he believes he can mend his wounds with his poetry, and thus I am his most loyal critic. He trots me out like a police dog. He calls our thirst for pads and pencils destiny. Our voices come together like two wings of a butterfly. On occasion, he closes his eyes and sees me. I am negative capability, the test to all men are created equal. We are likely to dance at weddings against my will. He pulled out the same moves writing this poem, a smooth shimmy and a hop. This page is a kind of looking glass, making strange whatever stone carvings he installed along the narrow road to his interior. I suffer in silence, wedded to his convictions. He would like to tell you the truth about love, but we are going to bed. To bed. And finally, this is a sound poem and an experiment for me. And it's after Hugo Ball, the incomplete sound poem of Fej Hun chant. Fej Hun chant. Gorbs, tika gorbs. Gorbs, tika gorbs. Weddy roof. Growled goff mar. Lago mar lago mar goff lago mar vrf weddy. Tisha bum Tisha. Pout put. Tisha bum Tisha. Pout put. Swin ikaf swin. Bumba turb. Bumba trab. Ikaf swin. Heart, sup air p, eyes, superb, sup air p, toes, superb, sup air p, mind, superb, sup air p. Mommy, where's my rattle? Thank you. Hi, Anjanette.
Hello, I'm Sterling Watson, and I want to send my thanks out to Les and Marina, as others have done. And I'm honored to read with this group tonight. This is chapter 25 of a novel entitled Night Letter. It's 1964 in the Florida Panhandle. This is the story of ex-convict Travis Hollister, 20 years old, whose quest is to redeem himself by saving a young girl, 14-year-old Donnell Briscoe, from the terrible life she is living with her father and brother. Donnell lives in a house in the pine forest where her father runs a small sawmill. She has made a refuge for herself in an abandoned house nearby. Travis has just rescued Donnell from some bikers who have taken her to a dive bar in Panama City. He has been injured during the rescue. We see the plume of black smoke in the sky a mile before we get to the turnoff at Donnell's daddy's house. It rises up fast, hot, and black, and then thins and turns eastward on the wind that blows from the Gulf into the steaming pine forests. It's not more than a minute after we pass Donnell's turnoff that we know the smoke is coming from the little house where Donnell lives her fairy life. I look over at her. My stomach aches with acid from the aftermath of Jimmy and the biker bartender with the big revolver. And now the smoke in the sky and the certainty of its source make my hands sweat and shake on the steering wheel. Donnell won't look at me. She's fascinated by the tower of smoke. Somehow the sight of it has dried her tears. She looks as numb now as my right arm feels from Jimmy's cue stick thumping. I stop at the turnoff to the secret place where little things made Donnell happy. I say, tell me what to do. Do you want to go in there or not? I'm thinking maybe we could save something. I'm thinking probably we can't, and trying could be dangerous. And there's a chance, small, that it's not the old house that's burning, just some brush or an old haystack. She looks at me for the first time since we left the bar. Go ahead, she says. I guess I want to see it. I stop the Plymouth where I always have. Two men stand in what was once the front yard of the old house. A red kerosene can rests on the ground between them. In the roar of the flames, they don't hear my engine rev and stop. Finally, one of them senses something behind him and turns. I can tell by his face that he's Donnell's brother, but not by any resemblance to her. He looks like her father. The other man, who turns and looks at me now, smiling, half his face painted a weird orange by the glow of the fire. There's a rifle leaning against the boy's leg, and watching me, he takes it by the barrel, tosses it into the air, and catches it by the pistol grip. He holds it with the butt on his hip like a soldier resting on the march. Donnell comes to life beside me. I don't have time to reach for her before she screams no and throws herself out of the car, running for the window at the side of the house where her fairy room is. The fire is clawing up through the center of the house, and some of it's already consuming the little room full of things that will burn fast when the flames come. But the window and the outside wall of that room are still holding. I get out of the car, only a few feet behind Donnell, and chase. She throws herself at the wall, clawing her little hands up to the windowsill and trying to climb and push the window up all at once. And somehow she manages to get it cracked and shoved up far enough for her head and shoulders to fit inside. And that's where she is when I grab her hips and pull her back, legs kicking and arms flailing, screaming no. I trap her hands from behind in an imprisoning hug and whisper in her ear, "It's too late. It's gone. There's nothing you can do." She fights me wild as a forest creature, but I hold on with my eyes shut until I begin to feel the strength seep from her limbs. I look down and see blood on my ankles where she's gouged me with those red high-heeled shoes. When she's finally still in my arms, all whimpering sobs and hard, exhausted breathing, I look over at the two men. They stare with fascinated eyes into the red heart of the fire. Have they seen this before? How the timbers, squeezed by the terrible heat, bleed their sap in droplets that hiss as they fall, fire snakes exploding into flame. How the roof evaporates and the walls lean in and the floor sags under the weight of the falling bones of the house until it gives way and an enormous cone of red embers lies on the bare ground under the 4 brick props that held up the house. How the mortar in the little chimney beyond the old rotten kitchen splits and zigzag cracks with a sound of zigzag cracks with a sound like pistol shots until a few bricks separate and fall away into the greedy fire. When it's almost over, the brother's eyes, drunk with destruction, draw away from the fire, and he looks at me holding his sister, her head fallen forward now to rest on my forearms. He smiles like he recognizes me or just knows what I'm doing, swings the rifle down from his hip to a position at mid-thigh, and ambles over to me and Donnell. "Get your hands off her," he says, "you pogey boy." He's wearing greasy Levi's flared at the bottom over high scuffed boots with mud-caked laces dragging. His bare chest, sweating from the fire, is muscled, but oddly long and tubular, with a dark cross of man hair running up from the navel to the throat and from nipple to nipple. He wears a black and white striped railroad engineer's cap pushed off to the side and a slow smile that says he's as much as I am, even without the rifle that is not quite pointed at me. He says, "Donnielle, you get away from him. Come over here to me." He stamps his booted foot like he's trying to scare a dog, and the muddy laces snap. Donnell just hangs in my arms. Her right cheek rests on my right forearm, hot and wet with tears. I realize that her feet still hang above the ground, that I'm using strength I may need to hold her up like this. Without taking my eyes off her brother, I lower my mouth to her ear and whisper, "Go sit in the car. Wait for me there." I let her down slowly until her dangling red shoes touch the earth and I feel control go back up into her legs. She sniffles, wipes her mouth, and steps away from me, to the side at first, then back toward the Plymouth. Her brother shakes his head with dark philosophy. He's a man who's just told his truth to the world for the last time, and his next message will not come in words. The father takes a step away from the boy, then another, but not toward Donnell and my Plymouth. He's moving away from Brown where something messy is about to happen. He wears the same ancient zippered, vaguely military nylon jumpsuit, the kind that flyers wore, and his gut and mealy white chest spill out of it beneath the black whorls of stubble growing down his neck. He takes a few more steps back, then to the side, and stands there curiously passive, his eyes on his son's back, then on me, and then back on the boy holding the rifle. I hear the car door open and close, but I don't look. I watch the boy. Donnell's father and I had our meeting on her front porch. He saw me edge toward the little table with the song in my head about bone marrow seeing the light of day, and he backed off. Now he's going to watch me and the boy like two roosters in a pit do what we have to do. I don't like the rifle, a .22, with a small black steel flashlight taped to the fore end, but I don't believe he'll use it on me. His brown eyes are mean, but they're pale and squinted too. They've spent too much time in the dark, sighting down that barrel at small things that can't shoot back. I'm guessing he'll kill a man, but not now, not yet, later. And a voice in my head says, "Dirty white boy, don't guess wrong." He takes a step toward me, raising the rifle 6 inches higher and drawing that black dot, the hole in the end of the barrel, 10 degrees closer to pointing at my belly. He says, "What are you doing with my little sister, Pogie boy?" Then he shouts, "Donielle, you little whore." He pronounces it hoer. And behind me in the pine woods, a covey of quail takes wing at the outrage of his family grief. I say, "You going to shoot me with that rifle? If you are, go ahead and do it. If you're not, put it down." I point at the ground. I look across the boy's bare shoulder, slick with sweat, at the father. I call to him, guessing, "You've already burned down a building that doesn't belong to you. Are you going to add murder to your day's work?" The father looks at me, at the back of his son's head, at the pine trees that surround the little cleared space where the house is now a smoking pyramid of black waste. He says, "I wasn't worried she'd catch to them trees. Man owns them trees wouldn't like that. But nobody owns this here house." He looks out at the woods, shrouded in vines, the path Donnell took the day she met me here. He says, "Besides, a man can burn down a whorehouse. Leastways he ought to be able to. Ain't no jury court around here would convict a man for burning down a whorehouse." The man's words give the boy back some of the evil courage mine took away from him, and he swings the rifle another 10 degrees toward my middle. If he pulls the trigger now, the bullet would miss me in the precious inches between my left hand and left hip. I point my bloody right hand at his face and say, "Put the gun down and let me get out of here. You don't want me here when the sheriff comes. That smoke can be seen from 10 miles away." The father says, his voice sing-songy, "I know the sheriff. Know him well." The brother says, "Pogie boy, you whored out my sister and I'm going to kill you for it." I say, "I never touched your sister." I look around the boy, finding the father's face in a white haze that is not entirely natural. It's my fatigue and fear and the pain in my shoulder. I say, "I told you, sir. Donnell and I are just friends." He sings out low and musical, "And I told you, city boy, Donielle don't have no friends. She's too young for that." My arm's still out straight in front of me, my forefinger still pointing at the brother's face. I close my eyes and try to think. Back in the infinite spaces behind my eyes, I see the condition of things. My anger is all gone. The fires of bitterness are cold, blown out by broken pool cues and a biker's comically long-barreled revolver, extinguished by the draft from the flames that took away Donnell's little world of candles and books and men in dinner jackets. I open my eyes, take a deep, tired breath, and walk forward, seizing the end of the rifle barrel. I pull it the last 10 degrees, fit it into my navel, and say, "Shoot, goddamn you, or let me go." I look into his eyes, expecting change and seeing none. I've never known terror like this. He is considering it. His left eye twitches, trying to close as it does when he lays a cheek on the rifle stock and sights, flipping on the flashlight to send a sharp white beam across the forest floor to the eyes of a fox or a rabbit, paralyzed in light. I watch the eye, and the tired voice in my head says, "If he closes it, you're dead." And the eye doesn't close. Slowly, I unlock the black hole at the end of the barrel from the notch at the bottom of my torso where my mother sent life into me. And I slide it 10 and then 10 more degrees away from me toward the still hissing, smoking pile of wrack that was Donnell's boat of dreams. I start walking toward my car. I tell myself, don't run, keep it slow, don't shoot off your mouth, no parting words. I get it. I get in, start the engine, and back up past where the father stands watching the boy make the end of this story. I hear the boy yell, Doniel, you come back here to me. There's a frustrated whine in his voice now, and I know that frustration can be more dangerous than outrage or command. In my mind's eyes, I see him aim the rifle. It's one thing to let me go, another to let me take his sister. But I don't turn to look. I'd rather have the bullet in the side of my head as a surprise, not see the puff of gray smoke at the black end of the barrel before my brain splatters the white dress of the blonde child cowering next to me. Thank you.
All right, everyone. I think you can hear me, and for some reason you can't see me. But I just wanted to say thank you to Anna, Michael, Major, and Sterling. And if you guys like what you heard, please support your local bookstore. And if you have any questions, you can email wip@eckerd.edu. And that's it. We will see you here tomorrow.